Good evening. This is the special committee meeting of the Land Use Citizens Task Force of the Lake Bluff Park District. It is May 17, 2022. And could we call the roll, please?
Chairperson Kraft.
Here.
Member Kraft. Here. Member Stewart.
Here.
Member Douglas. Member Pascal. Here. Member Russell.
Here.
Member Snowland.
Here.
We have a quorum. We have an actual quorum physically in the meeting room, and we have two members. Hello, guys. We have two members on Zoom. I'm going to move a little bit with the approval of everyone. I'd like to move the V3 report to right now. Tom Slawinski, who I see has joined us, only has about 20 minutes, and he was gracious enough to allocate some time to discuss his report. We had a meeting with Tom yesterday. My God, we had a meeting with Tom yesterday. So Tom, I'm going to turn it over to you. If you could just go through the report a little bit and then allow some time for questions, if you would.
Do you want me to share it or do you just talk generally?
Sure.
Okay, let's, do you guys want to share? Tom, do you want to share? What's easier for you?
I'll try and share it.
Okay. God bless, because I could never figure that out. Still can't.
Can you see
Okay.
that?
Yep.
Yes. So, well, I'm Tom Slawinski. I'm V3's Technical Director for Wetlands and Ecology. Just as a little background, V3 does a lot of wetland consulting, and we have 2 wetland mitigation banks in Kane County. I was initially asked by George Russell to kind of do a little pro bono presentation to the task force on wetland mitigation banking that led to V3 preparing my report, which is shown on screen. It was kind of a limited scope analysis, but we were asked to look at 3 questions. Can the comp floodplain storage requested by SMC be provided within the existing 18-hole golf course? Second, what is the maximum number of wetland mitigation credits or acres that can be provided on the golf course property? And I assume you know the background related to that. And thirdly, can both the floodplain storage and the proposed wetland mitigation bank be accomplished on the property? So I'm going to move to some exhibits that were prepared by V3. Some of them are being refined currently, but we just took a basic, pretty theoretical approach to what areas not in play, well, maybe not in play on the golf course, could be excavated to provide some comp storage, and those are shown here in blue within the 100-year floodplain that's shown by the dashed pink line. We're going to be in the near future refining this, working with Golf Visions, the golf course operator, because a lot of these are in play on the golf course and a lot of golfers don't like ponds or wetlands. We're also going to be looking at, can some comp storage be placed within existing wetlands? And we will be conducting a wetland delineation to further evaluate that shortly. But there is a fair amount of room to provide. This shows about 34 acre-feet of additional storage within the golf course property, but again, it needs a little refinement.
So Tom, if I could interject just a minute. What that chart, just for our vast viewing audience, what that chart shows is areas that would have water on them during a significant storm event. Those are not permanent ponds. Those are areas where water will accumulate if there's a significant flood.
And some of those could be wetland vegetation, some could be turf grass that can tolerate a little bit of flooding. And the 100-year flood event probably has, I don't know the exact elevations, 1 to 2 feet of water here for maybe up to a week's time. I know there's some existing flooding on the golf course, and that would have to be evaluated as part of this next level assessment.
Okay, thank you.
These are just some exhibits that we prepared, and the most important one is this one. Shows mapped existing wetlands on the golf course property shown in blue. This is from the Lake County SMC Wetland Map. As I mentioned, we're going to be doing an actual on-site wetland delineation in the next few weeks to figure out where are the actual wetlands, what is their quality, and can they be modified to provide some comp storage. This is just a floodway map. So initially we were supposed to be evaluating a wetland mitigation banking concept prepared by SMC. However, they didn't have any real concepts. So V3 prepared this exhibit, and this is kind of based on topography, not a lot of detailed design, but it shows in green here where potential wetlands could be created along the Chicago River tributary to function as a wetland mitigation bank. The existing wetland shown here in light blue could be enhanced to provide some wetland mitigation credits. And this shows a total potential credits of 77 acres or credits. Again, we are going to be refining this. There's some issues. Our property boundaries are not correct. That's where we stand. And we've kind of evaluated the potential revenue and costs related to doing a wetland mitigation bank on the golf course property. In general, that would eliminate use of the, at least in this wetland area, as a golf course.
And just for the record, the golf course is approximately 145 acres. The area that could be converted into a wetland is about 95 acres.
Correct.
V3 has calculated about 77 credits that could be generated from the 95 acres. And that leaves approximately 50 acres east of the buffer line, the orange line, east of the buffer line, that would not be wetland. And we'll have some discussion about uses of that property, alternative uses later on tonight.
Tom, is the buffer line that you show there, is that pretty consistent with the 500-year flood level?
I don't know offhand, but in general, we are within the floodplain. The buffer is just a 100-foot buffer that's required adjacent to a wetland mitigation bank.
Right, but what I'm asking, I guess, is are you essentially saying that the wetland area is basically the 500-year flood level?
I don't know exactly, but it's in that general location.
Okay.
So we did prepare a cost estimate for everything but the earthwork, because you can't really figure that out till you have a more detailed grading plan. But generally we show, based on the acreage, the cost to do the wetland and prairie buffer plant plugs and seeding. Part of that is managing the vegetation before the wetland is created. There's 5 years of management and monitoring, well, a minimum of 5 years, mainly weed control and occasional burning. And then 5 years of vegetation and hydrology monitoring and submitting an annual report to the Corps of Engineers.
So for the task force, as we get later this evening into the financial model, Mark, who built the financial model, didn't have these numbers. So one of the things we'll need to do is to look at the assumptions that were made for some of the cost factors and compare them to these numbers, and then make some decisions as we move our assumptions up or down. Gives us another data point.
And then our last effort was, in general, so to create wetlands, you probably have to do some earthwork to lower the elevations to make them a little wetter. That will provide a significant amount of compensatory storage, although in designing wetlands, the hydrology needs to be very accurately, so the wetlands are either not too wet or too dry. And again, this is just and actually this one shows the floodplain line in response to that previous question. So it probably goes beyond the 500-year event a little bit, but a lot of comp storage can be provided by creating a wetland mitigation bank in this area. That's pretty much a quick summary of our report. Some of the economic information, the potential revenue will be discussed later as I understand it. And again, our next step is to do some refinements, both from doing a detailed wetland delineation on the property, refining some of the comp storage exhibits, working with the golf course management company, seeing if we can, it's likely that you can provide some comp storage within the wetlands along the creek, the river, and the mapped wetlands. They would have to be excavated, but that can be considered wetland enhancement if done properly.
Tom, can you comment on, this was your last slide, you don't need to go back to it, but the additional acre feet of storage that a full wetland creation would entail? What would that create?
Yeah, and there's some design parameters that weren't discussed in my report. And this is kind of a plan based on assumed grading. But based on this analysis, we'd be excavating about 44,000 cubic yards of material, which has to go somewhere. That has a volume of approximately 227 acre feet. And then with a net gain of about 133 acre feet.
So two things important there, 133 additional acre feet. Remember, months ago, we were concerned that 40 acre feet wasn't enough. If this project was going to go, it didn't deal with climate change. It didn't deal with additional deterioration of the watershed. So we were asking questions about what's the maximum capacity for this property, and that's now an answer, roughly 130 additional acre feet. And the second important consideration for us as we think about alternatives at the end of this meeting, where does the dirt go? So Tom gave a huge number, 44,000 cubic yards of dirt. So the concept that we'll be talking about later is based on that earth being moved to the 50 acres that are not wetland. And since that is less expensive for the builder, SMC, than trucking it away, that contouring of that 50 acres into what condition the Park District desired would be covered by SMC. At least that's the operative assumption. So that's why SMC would be comfortable in contouring and grading, and actually in some situations planting on that 50 acre portion.
After moving.
I don't know.
44,000
Good
cubic,
question.
because it's pretty high already.
That's a good question, and that's part of the design parameters for that. Tom, anything else? Otherwise, I'll ask George if he has any comments. He was in much of the meeting on Monday.
No comments.
I have one. I didn't
We have
see,
a question.
and the numbers, I didn't see in the numbers, or maybe I just didn't read it right. What the cost is as a banker, what's your commission for selling the wetland credit, Tom?
We haven't quite figured that out. We don't, our two mitigation banks don't operate that way. We're basically the designer, the builder, and the manager, and we just sell the credits with no commission. And that's factored into our agreement with Hampton Township, the property owner. We are looking into that and looking at other alternatives for a program manager to operate the mitigation bank and sell the credits.
Yeah, that's one of the key assumptions in the financial model is the what it costs to hire a banker to do it. And then the other piece is what it costs to hire a project manager on behalf of the Park District to manage the project working with SMC, kind of as the interface. So those are important decisions. Other questions? Al, do you have anything?
Not at this time.
Julie? Vicky? Mark?
I'm good for right now. Thank you.
Okay.
Tom, excuse me, I appreciate your additional financial inputs. They'll be put to good use.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so before we let Tom go, I just want to summarize what V3 will be doing pending the park board approval of adding to the existing contract. So they will be performing a delineation study, which is actually going out on the property and testing to make sure the boundaries of the hybrid soil. Because right now, the 95 acres generating 77 credits is based on the hybrid soil maps that Al shared with us many months ago. So he's actually going to do a delineation study to identify the actual location where a wetland is feasible. And then the second thing he's going to be doing is refining the comp storage number. Since the one that we have makes the golf course probably unplayable, at least not attractive to play. So working under a set of assumptions that let's keep a playable golf course. That's why Golf Visions needs to be involved. Keep a playable golf course, and then let's maximize whatever storage we can. So that report is still pending. And then whatever Tom can share with us on wetland banking and project management costs. And I realize, Tom, that that's part of your proprietary model, but whatever you can share with us would be greatly appreciated. And then tidying up a couple of the maps, the striped boundary line that's the main thing that needs to be adjusted to make sure that we're covering only Park District's property. And hopefully Tom will have that for us. Well, he needs to get approval for the other piece of work, so.
He was going to find out the cost on that and let us know, right?
I'm sorry?
He was going to let us know the cost.
Tom, are you preparing
Yeah, still working on that a little bit.
Okay.
Thank you.
When is the next board meeting?
Next Monday.
So there's a meeting on Monday, Tom, so if you could get that to John no later than, Friday.
Yeah, that should be no problem.
Okay, so let me say Thursday morning.
We'll be working on that.
That's still fine. I'm gonna work on it tomorrow.
All right, any other questions for Tom at V3?
There's a hand up.
There's a hand up, all right. Who would like to ask a question?
M.M. Collins.
I'm sorry?
M.M. Collins.
Okay,
Otherwise known as Mickey Collins. Can you hear me?
yes.
Okay.
Hi, Mickey.
Hi. I have a topic that I think should get thrown in the mix here. And I think V3 with their very wide base of civil engineering expertise could actually contribute on this. The costs, maintenance costs that I am seeing sound like what would be necessary for any native plant restoration and wetland credits, et cetera. Removing invasives, but nothing very costly. And what concerns me is that this is also a stormwater management project, not a simple wetland. And stormwater, well, we already know it's going to flow in twice as fast as it currently does. But stormwater has an inevitable effect, and that is that it causes erosion and it causes sedimentation because it tends to take dirt from where you want it and put it where you don't want it. So I think, to make sure that, we're looking into the future for all the ramifications to the park district, we should evaluate and know and discuss with SMC what's going to happen, as maybe this dynamically changes, as the capacity maybe lessens because of sedimentation, or any of the many things that can happen from repeated flooding. And then what might those costs be? And then who is responsible? Does the park district, are we good as long as we maintain the plantings and all the obligations that we have for maintaining the wetland credits? Will SMC take care of the larger issues of changes to this stormwater management system?
Tom, do you have, I can answer, Mickey, the second part of that, but Tom, do you have any thoughts
Well,
on?
in general, those are all factors that are considered in the design of constructing wetlands within a floodplain. And wetlands do provide significant downstream benefits to both the water quality and the flood issues, but again, that has to be considered in the design. And there are ways to minimize erosion from entering the wetlands. But again, and this is not detention, this is floodplain comp storage coming from upstream areas where it is sediment does filter out before it gets to the property.
Well, but don't you think that it's inevitable over time? Let's look 20 years ahead. There are going to be some changes, right? I think we're kind of looking at the near term, but because this is kind of a hybrid of both the stormwater storage, temporary storage, and wetland credits, that we have to look at both aspects of it.
Oh, that's very true.
Yeah, Mickey, we're going to talk about that when you get to the financial model. There are three parts to the maintenance. There's a maintenance of the plantings, which generally would be SMC's responsibility for a period of time to make sure the plants and the plugs and seeds are taking and are growing as they should. There's a portion when there's a time period when SMC will cease that responsibility and the park district will be responsible for that short-term maintenance. And then there's in perpetuity long-term maintenance. That's the park district's responsibility. And as you'll see at the end of this meeting, if you stick in with us that long, the suggestion is that there's a long-term fund that's created, let's just say a percentage of every sale of a wetland credit that goes into long-term maintenance.
I'm gonna have to excuse myself because I have to go to another
Yes,
meeting.
Tom, thank you very much. We look forward to seeing you again.
All right, thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you. All right,
Yeah,
anything else?
Steve,
Yes, George.
one comment in reaction though to Mickey Collins's comment. It is a very good thought. The East Skokie, as we all are aware, when we've ever driven over it, it runs chocolate in color like many of the urban streams around when it rains hard, and that means that the Skokie is loaded with sediment, and that sediment is going to continue to move down, and it will spread out into the golf course as it does now, some water into the future wetland if we were to build a wetland. And that specific question should be asked of the appropriate experts several decades from now. And I'm certainly not aware of anything that would indicate that SMC would take responsibility if sediment loading does occur. What is the end game?
Yeah, all good questions, George. And something that, as Tom said, is part of the design and the negotiated arrangement if this ever gets off the ground. And then ultimately, the responsibility is the park district. So in terms of planning, financial planning, there needs to be an asset that's created that takes into consideration even significant maintenance events 20 years down the road. So this is not something that you throw some money at it and then walk away. This is something that needs to be a permanent endowment to pay for these kinds of repairs. Anything else from task force on V3? Let's go back to the normal order on the agenda. This is item 1C. The committee, task force, and all of the park district meetings allows a portion of time at the beginning of each meeting for members of the public who would like to address the task force on areas within our purview. Is there anyone first physically on site that would like to comment? And if you would, there should be a microphone there. No one? Yeah, go ahead. Just speak into the mic. You can sit there.
You can hear me if I sit?
Okay. He said, just watch the man behind the mask.
Okay. I'm Connie McCabe. I'm a resident of the sanctuary. And we'd just like to say that we're here to support the development of the Lake Bluff Preserve, moving away from a golf course. The golf course seems to be, speaking of cost, very costly and losing a lot of money. And that's a cost that's going to need to be dealt with in the future. If you're talking about maintaining planting and dealing with sediment in the future for the golf course is looking very bleak. And certainly the heavy use of pesticides and fertilizers. And we would just like to support the move toward a nature preserve and have that option be given serious consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. I would suggest that you take a look. We've got a full financial package on the golf course. I think it was our last meeting that has the most up to date. So I would recommend everyone to take a look at that so you get a sense of what the condition of the golf course financially is. And then there'll be a portion of our final report that will discuss that as well. Anyone else here that would like to comment? Any hands raised? Yes.
Sure. Hi, Erin Jocelyn. I guess I would echo what was just shared, but also I would really like for the park district to consider the opportunity costs of a longer term plan of sustainability, of a broader population of interest. Financial is obviously important, but at the end of the day, there are costs associated with this to the lack of opportunity for a lot of people in our community to access things. Sure, you can walk the golf course when it's not completely soaked in the middle of the summer, but beyond that, I just think that there is an opportunity for our youth and for the younger families far above and beyond what a golf course can consider. And frankly, I think that there has been a pretty significant bias that I have watched from the park district board itself. And when I look at the roles and responsibilities of that task, of that group, and I appreciate all the time and energy, I can't even imagine, because it's very time consuming. But objectivity is absolutely essential to a decision. Objectivity that considers the voices of the broader community. Finances are important, but I just think that there needs to be some way to engage and include the community's voice more broadly versus just this two populations that have clearly opinionated views. So that's just my perspective. And I think that from a change management perspective, you're going to get much better buy-in if you include the people along the way. Thank you.
Thank you. Any hands raised?
Yes, the first one is Deborah Fisher.
Deb, how are you?
Thank you. I just, again, applaud you guys for everything you're doing. I just have a question. Have you gotten to the point where you can kind of give a timeline for what this project would take? Meaning that, let's say that the Park District decides that they want to do the full opportunity of maximizing credits. You know, my understanding is it's the park or the golf course is actually one of the most used assets that we have. And is there any kind of a timeline for how long it would be out of commission to people? It seems like people are thinking that this is a relatively quick project, and maybe it is, but I'm not clear on a timeline. And I think it would be great also in the report if there could be suggested timelines for the different options that you're looking at. And the second part of the question is just if amenities are determined to be desired, such as the walkways and the fishing ponds and the soccer field or whatever, can those be created concurrently while the wetlands are being built? You know, deconstruct the golf course, build the wetlands or whatever the terminology is, and then when do the amenities come in? Are they after the wetlands or concurrently with it? So those are just kind of timeline questions that I'd be curious to know.
Thanks. Yes, we will have a full timeline for every alternative that we're going to be discussing tonight, and hopefully a few more.
Great.
The timelines are very different based on the alternatives that are selected. If an 18-hole golf course remains, there would be a portion of time when, and storage is provided, there would be a portion of time when the course would be closed. It would be probably one season, maybe a portion of one season. If the full wetlands are created, it would be a 1-year building process and a 5-year growth process and potentially a 10-year credit sales process, just to give you a flavor. But in the final report, there will be complete timeline on each of the options that we identified. Very good point.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Next speaker is John Shaw.
Hi, and thank you for all that you guys are doing. My comment is really just the nature of the golf course and Park District in general. Unless I'm reading it wrong, the Park District, they hold all park properties in trust, not just for the people of Lake Bluff, but for the people of the entire state. And to that extent, last year, the golf course hosted 30,000 rounds of golf. I mean, that's a lot of activity. And I would challenge anybody supporting the wetlands to say that it would get 30,000 visits per year. So I support the golf course, the full golf course. And if we were going to consider a 9-hole golf course, I don't know if I'm speaking for all.
John, you're fading on us.
Okay. Is that okay?
I think if you talk right into whatever speaker you have.
I'm just talking at my computer and I'm not
There you
really
go.
sure. Okay.
Okay.
I don't know if I'm speaking for all golfers, but certainly the guys I'm closest with who are members over at the golf course, that the idea of having a 9-hole golf course is kind of a waste of time. Because unless we have, you know, the full golf course, and oh, by the way, I play everywhere around here and I like our golf course. It's longer than Deer Path and it doesn't take 5 hours to play like either Deer Path or Foss Park. So I support keeping the full golf course and do not support any plan that would just have a 9-hole golf course. That's it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, John.
Yep.
That's everybody.
That's everyone?
Yes.
All right, thank you. We will have at least one more opportunity for questions as we get through another 2 or 3 parts of our agenda. Agenda item number 2, the minutes of the May 3rd special committee meeting. These were in our packet that was distributed on Friday. Are there any corrections, additions, deletions? Yeah.
Yes, on page 5, I believe. Right at the bottom, the last paragraph. The last sentence says, also he said there was existing debt to be paid at 25,000 per year through 2026. That should be more like 125,000.
Correct.
It varies between 120 and 125,
Yeah.
so,
And I think the number I've been using is 125 over 5 years, so 650.
yeah.
John, do you have that? Okay. Other corrections, changes? Hearing none, yeah, go ahead.
Just number 4, page 4, it states a resident. Stated, that resident stated her name was Susan Goodsir.
Sorry, where are you?
Page 4 on the top, it says the resident stated that one of her biggest concerns is that the proposal does not pertain to Lake Bluff. The resident's name is Susan Goodsir. She stated it at the meeting.
Okay. Any other changes? I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes of May 3rd, 2022 as amended. Motion, Nikki, second, Julie. Any additional discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? To reports and discussions, we've looked at that. We've already had 10, so we're moving along. The remit questions. So we have gone through our first round of edits on the remit section 1 and section 2, the questions and the answers. Those are still being refined. Nikki is working on them, and Julie is also going to be working on them. So, and I'm going to talk a little bit about our process because we're going to do the same thing with the final report. So the draft of the report will go to Nikki. Nikki will do her magic. And depending on timing, if there's a board meeting, we'll have a copy at the board meeting. If it's between meetings, then Julie will take a look at it for from her perspective, and then we'll get the revisions to the full board. So next meeting, we'll do the remit, answers to the remit 1 and 2. And depending on how fast my fingers are, we may have a couple of sections of the final report that have gone through this initial edit to look at in 2 weeks. My goal, candidly, is in 4 weeks from today, we'll have a final report in front of us that has been fully vetted and edited, and we'll be able to hopefully get it real close to approval.
I just want to make a comment, suggestion, and get everyone's reaction to it. Because what I don't want to do is put a lot of time into something with them. People say, no, this isn't what we visioned or wanted. You know, my goal, and I've stated this before, is I'd like to see an executive summary that anyone in the community can pick up and really understand these issues. So as I sat down and started to type, you know, I wanted to expound in some areas, include other things, be really clear about, you know, what SMC is representing it would do, and sort of lay it out in a fashion that I think is going to be, you know, very user friendly. So when I'm going to be editing, my objective and hope would be to do that in a way that's not just wordsmithing, but sort of more comprehensively putting it forth. And I just want to make sure that everyone will be okay with that. I'm happy to circulate a sample in advance if you like. You know, I definitely want everyone's input on it, but I do think we need a product that is really community user friendly.
As Steve outlined it, and I agree with this approach, I'm going to be editing it first, but my edit is much more, you know, just the nitty gritty. It is wordsmithing. It is making sure that we're consistent throughout the document, and making sure that things are, formatted in a way with headings that make it comprehensible. I will also have an eye towards what you're talking about, but you, I think, are much better suited to just making sure that it's sufficiently comprehensive for people to understand. Also, you have the legal perspective on it. So that would be the process. I would do the first edit. I might have suggestions or thoughts for you. I would pass it on to you. You would do your edit, and then it would go to the whole task force. I also just want to mention for the remit questions parts 1 and 2, I've had some feedback from 2 of the task force members. If anyone else has any comments on those, please get them to me as soon as you can so that I can incorporate them and get that over to Steve for when he's writing his report. Sounds good.
Okay. Any?
Yeah, I would, Julie, I would support the executive summary product, and particularly helping to provide a roadmap and that have with pointers to the detail, because I think that would be particularly helpful to work our way, because this is going to be a fairly comprehensive and perhaps even complicated product as in toto. And anything we can do to not only just summarize it, but also point people in the right direction so that they can, they know where to go to source detail is a plus.
And I think Julie, I might not say she volunteered to write the executive summary. I think that's what my notes say. And Nikki, you're going to be putting in all the important terms that we have identified. That's all a glossary.
It has to be expanded.
Yeah.
And then after Julie's review and after the task force has had its input, then I'd like to just take one final, quick edit through the whole thing for style and format and everything.
Yep. And as I alluded to before, since this is a rather lengthy document, I think it would be more expedient if every time we meet, we have sections of the report that we can review, rather than wait to the end and review the whole thing. So this will be kind of an ongoing process. Okay. All right. Oh, and I need a volunteer because I can do PowerPoint, but it ain't free. It's not very good. Is there anyone that we know, and Jen, I want to talk to you about resources for building a deck, and also for how we do, if we print this or if we have it all online, but we can do that sometime in the future. Okay. Agenda item number 3C, Stormwater Management Commission. In your packet is a memo that was sent out May 5th to the Stormwater Management Commission. It has 3 main sections. It is an attempt to, it's a third memo. It's an attempt to continue to refine our understanding of SMC's commitment, what they will do, what they won't do. And we're getting really close. The 3 areas that this memo contains are, first, a little bit more confirmation about the scope of work. Second, funding sources, trying to get our arms around their funding sources. And third, and this is in a chart at the bottom of the 3rd page, responsibilities between the Park District and SMC. We had a meeting, God, it was only yesterday too. We had a meeting yesterday that George was also part of, and Emily was part of, and a large cast of characters. The Stormwater Management Commission has committed to answering these questions in writing. And as soon as we get those, we'll send them out to the entire group. The initial discussion that we had didn't significantly change the understanding that we have of what SMC's commitment is. There are some details, especially around funding sources, but in terms of what they are committed to doing and why, it is pretty much in line with what we've talked about for the last couple of months. But without having the actual answers, I don't want to go through them. I'd rather go through the actual answers from SMC. George, any comments on the discussion?
No,
Okay. All right, so we'll get those, John, as soon as we get them, let's send them out to the whole group and then certainly on the agenda for next time. All right, this is now on to the bulk of the discussion for today. There are two things we'd like to do. I'm going to run through a draft. Since this is a land use task force, I'm going to run through 6 alternative uses of the Park District property. I created these. Mark helped me think through some of them. These are things we've talked about these things over the last 4 months. One of the things we'd like to do today is to get your input on these alternatives. If they make sense, if they make no sense, if we missed some, we can have as many as we want. So I'm going to go through these one by one, and we can have some discussion around that. Then I'm going to turn it over to Mark, and Mark has built a fairly robust, not fairly robust, a very robust financial model. And he'll take us through the design of the model and especially the assumptions that are driving the financial results of that model. So let me start with the alternative land use, and maybe we can put that up on the screen for our Zoomers.
You able to share that now at page 40B of the package?
Okay, so I'll start while we're working through that. So again, the task that the Park District has given to the task force is to consider the SMC proposal from a land use perspective and to provide analysis of alternative land uses. So the intent here is that the board will consider these alternatives and the financials that are associated with them, and frankly, pick 1 or 2 or 3 to have further discussions with SMC or with outside sources. But this is the summary of our work over the last couple of months. So it's important that we coalesce around what the alternatives are. So I'm going to go through each one and then let's discuss each one separately. So alternative number 1 is maintaining the existing land use without additional stormwater storage. This is a thank you, but this is not for Lake Bluff. We want to keep the golf course the way it is. SMC has said that they could use the Navy base for storage, but this would essentially say we've considered this and we decide not to move forward. Comments on that?
Pretty straightforward.
Pretty straightforward.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah.
But you say the existing 18-hole golf course would remain as it is today?
As it is today.
You don't
Would
really
we
know that
specify
yet.
as it is today?
As it is today. Alternative 2 is when it would be remaining with changes. So we can make that clear that remain as it is today with no additional stormwater storage, no work done on the golf course at all, if that makes it clearer for you.
I would think so.
Okay. Alternative number 2 then is what we have talked a bit about, and that's to maintain the existing whole golf course and to allow stormwater to flow over the existing course. Now, this is apparently what SMC had proposed a year and a half ago that I didn't know about until a couple of weeks ago. This was their initial request to the Park District. It simply was an ask, please let us, in large flood events, allow up to 40 additional acre feet to flow naturally through the golf course. No redesign of the course, just let it flow through. It would be wetter During wet periods, during dry periods, it wouldn't change at all. No change in topography, no change in anything, no new plantings, no credits. Just let the water flow.
You said the flood event would last longer.
The flood events would last longer, the golf course would be closed longer. We may want to do an economic model that gives what's the price of having a golf course closed during peak season. If we want, we can do that.
Would SMC be able to control that flow, or are we talking about just SMC doing their larger pipe that they were talking about and letting the chips fall where they may? In other words, that it would be the downstream impact that they.
It would be we haven't asked them that and we can't. My understanding is they are contracting for the plumbing, right? For the piping on 41 and under the railroad tracks. And until they find out what storage is, they'll just restrict additional flow from happening. But if option 2, alternative 2 would be selected, my understanding is they would simply open the restrictor gate and the additional design capacity of stormwater storage, which is 40 acre-feet, would flow naturally onto the golf.
That was my question, was whether they can control that. In other words, they open the floodgates essentially when they need it, and then other times it would be restricted.
I don't think there's an open or close. I think it's always on.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, then I understand.
Which, and maybe I was thinking too hard about this, but if there is an event that would generate more than 40 acre-feet, my assumption is that all of that additional storage, all of that additional stormwater would flow into the golf course.
Because they have no way.
They have no way of measuring. So it's 40 acre-feet and we close the pump and then let 41 flood again. So.
Okay. So.
Yeah.
Why? I mean, does this really need to be evaluated as an option? It sounds like a lose-lose.
It's an alternative land use. Remember that these are alternatives for the park board to, what does the park board want to do? And this is one of the things that they may want to do.
But again, I don't know that we carry here long, because it seems like there's no upside at all to any faction of Lake Bluff, anyone in the community with that kind of, it's worse for the golfers. It does nothing for the preserves people. What might, as another alternative, we want to make sure we have 6, would be that, there's no wetland, there's stormwater storage, and then a repurpose of the entire plot. That is what I'm hearing is something that maybe is what people who are advocating for a change are interested in.
Okay, so hold that thought and let's tentatively call that alternative 7.
Okay.
Well, what's to stop SMC from doing this anyways?
That's true. Without permission, they cannot put more water downstream on our property without permission of the park.
We have to say, yes, they can do that. They can't do that by law.
So that's what they originally said. If we didn't agree with the project, they would use the restrictor plate, so it would not allow the additional water for it.
Because they have to mitigate for the downstream communities.
Okay, then alternative 1 should state that SMC restricts the water flow to no more than today.
Yeah.
Something like that.
It's no additional work, no change. So there's no additional flood water, no additional work. Okay.
Right.
Presumably, if the park board rejected the project, in other words, selected alternative 1, SMC would probably be looking at their other options for constructing stormwater storage. So it's not that it would necessarily be permanently restricted. If that were the case, why would they bother to put in the new pipe? But they would probably be looking at constructing the storage on the Navy base and whatever the other options were.
Right. So on alternative 2, I think there is a financial situation here. I would think that if the park district would agree to allow more than 40 acre-feet of stormwater storage to flow onto the golf course naturally, which would disrupt golfing, I would suggest that there could be a negotiated fee arrangement. I'm not sure if the board ever talked to SMC about that, but it would seem to me that SMC would need to compensate the park district for, at a minimum, the loss of revenue, but potentially more for the significant change in use that this would create. So I think we should identify that as part of the option. Okay? Alternative 3 then is still maintaining the 18-hole golf course, but this is the one that would build alternative stormwater storage. So we saw B3 and we saw their diagram. That's the one that has all the blue ponds, right? So when there's a heavy event, there'd be a lot of blue water on the course. When I first saw that, I said to John, you know, you just tell Golf Vision, sell all the golf carts and buy little ducks, little 2-person vehicles, because that's what it's going to take on that course. So that would be one alternative to do this. It's not particularly friendly to golf. And that's the reason V3 is going to look at least one more option where you could create stormwater storage and still have a playable golf course. That's their next version. But just so we're clear, that number 3, there's no wetlands that are created, or if there are, they're relatively minor. So there's no significant revenue for the park district. The golf course would most likely be closed for a season, half a season, probably a season, I would think. And it would be restored to look and play just the way it is now.
And we don't know yet whether or not it's a feasible alternative.
We have a good sense that what V3 presented isn't going to work, just because there's too much blue on that map. Not playable. Tom Selinsky is fairly confident that his designers working with Golf Visions can find storage. So think of the base map. There's the northwest corner of the course that's wooded right now. That's a fairly big area that could be a rather deep, and this would be a retention pond. This would be just stormwater storage would be
The
retention.
wetland you're talking about in the corner.
Yeah, the wooded area in the northwest of the course, yeah. So that's one place they're gonna look at. And then there's some other areas along the channel of the river itself. So they'll look at least one more option, and park board may wanna look at other options to make 18-hole golf course coexist with up to 40 acre-feet storage. Okay. Okay.
That, is there still a negotiation to be had with SMC?
For
whatever. I mean, otherwise, I guess I'm struggling to understand if we're going to keep the golf course, why it's not just a hard no.
Because SMC, yes, there is still a negotiation. SMC would be willing to do numbers 2 and 3.
Well, they'll pay for it, the work to be done, but if we're giving them an out, is there a way to negotiate for something more than that?
I would think there is under both 2 and 3.
Yeah.
Especially because we know what they're willing to pay. Yep. So yeah, I think there's a discussion there as to what the value of the disruption. If it's closed for 1 full year, we can put a monetization of that, and there's other issues that we need to think about in terms of lost revenue or potential payments. Okay. Number 4. So now we get into maximizing green space on park district property. So visualize the map that had the entire park district golf course property as green space. A portion of it, those 95 acres, were either wetlands that would be created or wetlands that would be restored, plus the orange buffer. Does everybody remember that chart? Okay. So that's the concept, is that SMC would build the wetland on those 95 acres and would move the dirt that they're going to excavate, because right now the golf course is a rolling course, And a wetland doesn't like hills. A wetland, like water, has to flow downhill. So there would be grading that would be done. There are no pipes. This is a wetland, so it's all natural flow of water. But the grading would be done so that the water, the stormwater, in times of heavy floods would move over the wetland and then would gradually seep back into the Skokie River. So that's 95 acres. The material that's taken out of the course in order to create the correct grading would be spread over the remaining 50 acres under this scenario. And those 50 acres would be considered what I'm calling an upland prairie. You could call it a savanna. Think of it as a green space, not a wetland, but a green space that would be linked to the wetland. So if there are paths, the paths would run through both. They'd run through the prairie and through the wetland. But the idea is that it would be a green environment, all 145 acres. It could generate, we're using 75 credits because every amenity, if you put a path in, you can't sell that area as a wetland credit. So you'll see later we're using 75 wetland credits. So that's alternative number 4. Everybody okay with that one?
Steve, just the one clarification, you said there wouldn't be any pipes, and if trails are added,
Yeah, you're
there
right.
could be considerable number of pipes to move water under the trails.
Yeah, so if there are trails that are created, the trails would need to be elevated so that they wouldn't flood. So you could still walk through after a storm event. And as soon as you elevate something and interfere with the natural drainage of water, you have to have piping to allow it to flow underneath. One of the things we asked SMC, and which he confirmed and will do in writing, that their grading of the property will take into consideration, as long as they know where the paths will be. So they will in effect build pads for the walking paths as part of their original work. All right. Alternative number 5. Oh, back to number 4. One of the features of a wetland is that the property that has been converted into a wetland and is used to generate credits for sale must be moved into a permanent conservancy. So there needs to be an easement that precludes the park district in the future from changing the use of that property. In alternative number 4, that would be the 95 acres. So the 50 acres that would be the upland prairie would not be in conservancy, and the park district could modify use of that property in the future. Alternative number 5 keeps the 95-acre wetland, but then creates some other amenity or amenities on the 50 acres. And we've talked about athletic fields, soccer fields, baseball fields, a dog park, an ice rink. There could be a 9-hole golf course, an alternative golf experience, maybe a par 3, a driving range, a putting green, whatever the park district, if they would choose this option, it would be what the park district considers to be an attractive option for the community.
Did you do a cost analysis for each of those individual things?
We can swag it. That's one of the things we'll have to talk about now, but we're not going to do a detailed cost analysis, but we can give you how big a soccer field is and generally what a range of cost for that soccer field. But again, the concept here is that these are alternatives, and if the park district is interested in one or more of the amenities, then there needs to be additional work done on placement.
How would we determine the potential cost of each of these?
Well, we know what it costs. Mark knows what it costs generally to build a soccer field, for example. And you can use square footage to determine a dog park. Remember that SMC is going to grade that property. So, and if there's a soccer field and that needs drainage, they will consider in their grading the drainage for the soccer field. So it's really a question of where is it on the property, and it's the finished product. It's the, you know, the turf and everything else. So it's not all that much, but it is an expense, and there is long-term maintenance, short-term and long-term maintenance for all those. And when we get to this financial discussion, you can see some of the assumptions that Mark has made, and that's where we may need some more assumptions as we build up the financial model.
Yeah, and I think assumptions that we have a high degree of certainty about, so.
To the degree that we can. As you'll see, some of the assumptions, like what is a wetland banker charge to do wetland banking, is going to require some leaps of faith to come up with a reasonable estimate. But that's alternative 5, alternative 6. Yeah. Go ahead.
Hey,
Why do
one
we
comment.
want to include a 9-hole or par 3 golf course in this alternative?
I don't know. These
I mean,
are just
that seems to me
ideas.
to be the big difference with 5 to 6 is that 6 has the golf course, the 9-hole golf course.
Okay, so on number 5, these are just ideas. These are just things people said, and I'm sorry I didn't put the dollars on that. But these are just what people said, that maybe we could put something like that there. That's all. And the difference between 5, let me go to 6. George, you had a question before we go to 6?
Yeah, along the same lines of what Al is questioning here, we would really have to, based on what we know about the donor's restrictions, we would really have to have a 5A, because in Mark's chart, we're showing receiving all this money from the donor, but the donor has stated that they would not provide any donation if there's golf in any way, shape, or form out there. As I understand.
Let's hold off on that. Let's hold off on the donor and the restrictions until we get to the model. I'd prefer to have the discussion of these conceptual, recognizing that there are financial implications, but this is an exercise in concepts, alternative land uses, and then the financial model tells us whether or not it makes sense. So alternative number 6 is a different kind of 9-hole golf course. This is much more patterned on, remember the DuPage County slides that we saw? So half of the 9-hole golf course would be integrated into the wetlands. So you would be playing golf in the wetlands environment. And the other half, under this concept, you'd be playing golf on the remaining 50 acres. So you'd have a different golf experience, some of it through the wetlands, some of it not. That's the concept here. Obviously, if you're building a golf course on a portion of the wetland, you're reducing wetland credits. You're adding cost by building a golf course, et cetera. But again, for concept, this was one of the things that Mark wanted us to talk about. Okay. Yeah.
There's nothing to stop alternative 5 from being alternative 6. When you say putting in a 9-hole golf course, it could be the wetlands experience 9-hole golf course.
Right. The difference is, and the reason they're 2 separate alternatives, alternative 5 maintains the 95 acres of wetland and the 75 credits. So there's no difference in income potential between 4 and 5. There's a significant difference in income potential between 5 and 6. That's why they're separate.
Truth be told, Al, it would be very difficult to squeeze a conventional 9-hole golf course on the upland prairie plot. Looking forward, that's probably not a viable solution. It is very possible to fit a par 3 course on the upland prairie and have room to spare. But it's probably, in truth, it's probably not practical to consider a full 9-hole course in alternative 5. So if there's an interest in a 9-hole golf course, a significant portion of that is going to have to be in the wetlands because there's inadequate footprint on the upland area to carry it. And our golf course architect who is talking about something on the order of about 3.5 holes that would be in the wetlands. So just as a point of reference, but let's talk about that in the next section.
Julie, you have an alternative 7.
Alternative 7 would be, no wetland, maybe stormwater storage, maybe not, and just get rid of the golf course.
Yeah. So no wetlands, no golf course. And a complete change of use and repurposing of that property into something as yet undefined.
Right, because of course, once we do the wetland, maybe it is wetlands, but we don't sell credits so that we keep autonomy over that land. There's no conservation easement. The Park District in the future could do something different with it, but it seems to me like that ought to be at least one option.
Okay, and remember that's what Libertyville did. They took a golf course and they converted it into a wetland, but didn't convert it in a way that they could sell credits, nor did they want to. So they retain ownership of the property and they can change that use whenever they feel. Okay, I like that one.
Can do. Anybody else have alternatives I want to look at?
Well, I think 5's got to be split into 2.
And why is that?
It's got to be split into one that includes a 9-hole or par 3 golf course and one that excludes a 9-hole or par 3 golf course.
Isn't that so? If it excludes a 9-hole golf course, what's on the 50 acres?
Athletic fields, dog park, ice rink,
Okay.
just not a golf course.
Okay. So I don't see so forget about 9-hole. Think about a par 3. Think about an alternative golfing experience, a par 3, a mini golf, a pitch and putt.
Al, within the context of the restrictions provided by the donor, we could do a 5A or 5.5 or something, because if you could add the active recreation options and still be able to gain access to the donor funds. But if you chose to put a par 3 golf course on 5 as part of the active amenities, then that would no longer include donor funds. So yeah, we could tease that out if that would be instructive to the team, to the task force.
Well, we need to do it. I agree with Al. We need to do it because under the current conditions from the donor, that your table number 5
Okay,
mark doesn't work.
That's fine. We can. All I'm doing is laying it out,
right,
and explaining why 5 and 5A are both viable options for us to consider.
Yep. Let's call it 5 and 6. We'll change 6 into 7 and 7 into 8, just so we're real clear.
Okay, that's fine.
All right, good discussion. Other alternatives?
Well, I just want to comment. I'm glad we're breaking it down because one of my thoughts and concerns is that, everybody wants alternative 5 for a different reason. Somebody wants it because, yay, we're going to have an ice rink there. Oh, great, we're going to have a dog park there. And maybe we only get one of those things. And then people think, well, if I'd known it was going to be a dog park with an ice rink, then I would have, thought differently about it. So, I do think that, some clarity around what realistically could be done with that, what the cost is, what the likely use is, what the liability is, all of these things.
The good news is, at least back of the envelope, there's really quite a bit of space up there. And so what's in balance and what's in play is whether you want the donor funds, number one, because the donor will not pay for any of the active recreational features. So that's 100% from the park district budget. And so so we have a range of features. What we don't have is a master plan. So we're kind of going down the cafeteria line here, if you will. But at this particular point in time, we don't have a clear vision of what 5 might include. Okay, so that makes 5 a little tough. So we'll talk about how we put some money into our pocket for 5. It's kind of like remodeling a bathroom and your contractor says, I'm going to give you a budget and you can go out and buy your tile and buy your fixtures and all that sort of stuff. And here's a bucket of dough. Here's a bucket of money for that. And it may or may not include all the things that you want to put in your bathroom.
Okay,
So,
let's agree that we have 8 alternatives. I'm not hearing any more. And Mark, I'm going to turn it over to you. Do you want to start with assumptions or start with the model?
I'd prefer to start with assumptions.
So let's put up the
And,
assumption page and make it as big as you can on the screen.
Are you talking to me or talking to Jeff?
No, I'm sorry, talking to the man behind the mask.
Thank you.
Not that one, the next one. There you go.
There we go.
And
Thank
then
you.
make that, if you can make it even bigger, as big as you can make it. Okay, Mark, you've got the screen.
Just a sec here.
You don't know this by memory?
No, I'm not stalling. I'm just getting a drink of water. So with 1 or 2 exceptions, what we're looking at is a draft, a pro forma. It's cash flow, cash impact on the park district. And with 1 or 2 exceptions, it's a 10-year model. So the expenses, when we get down to continuing maintenance, for example, it's a 10-year. And as I said, there are 1 or 2 exceptions, and it'll make sense when we get there. I would, as you see, we've got what's on the left column are all of the items that are on the financial sheet, which is tab 1 of the spreadsheet that we've got here, or the other page that is in your packet. The second column describes what that's all about, and the second gives, what financial data we have to support it. And the fourth column is what we're using as a data source. And in some cases, that's a working assumption. In some cases, we've got, the second row is specific donor correspondence information, for example, and whatnot. And so what I will ask you, I'm more than happy to update the assumptions. We've got a lot of ground to cover. And what I would prefer, if somebody says, Mark, I don't like $100,000, I think it ought to be 200. Give me a quickie. I would, for all of our benefit, I'd prefer not to try to get into a protracted debate on what we ought to do. If there's a sensitivity that we need to look at a couple of different things, we'll do it. And this is a tool. It's a first pass for all of us as we kind of chug our way through this. So to that point, sale of credits. This is our wetland credit sales. Down at the bottom, and we'll get to that in a minute, talks about timing for sales. That came up in an earlier question comment that was raised earlier on, and I'm going back, and that's Deb Fisher's question. And it's total sales over a total 10-year period. And we're just assuming that it's going to take us 10 years to plow through all of the sales. It could be significantly less. It's unlikely to be more. We're using credit pricing that is it's based on anecdotal information that's been provided to us by Mr. Ryan, by SMC, by V3. The timing was provided by V3. And just to so you aren't flipping back, don't have to flip back. We just use the general assumptions of $120,000 per credit or acre foot, 135,000 and 150,000. The 150 was a figure that was included in community discussion that's comes from elsewhere. 135 is a midpoint. Quite frankly, it's a midpoint between 120, which happens to be what Tom and V3 offered up to us tonight, as a matter of fact. So I felt it only responsible to provide 3 different numbers there. So when we get there, you'll see that we've got 3 different columns for each of the wetland data. The donor contribution, this is our anonymous donor. The conditions of the donation are $1 million up to 5 years, whichever comes first. And I'm reading this because it's going to be small print for you. Donor funds may not be applied to the presence of a golf course, active amenities, or golf associated projects. So the donor won't pay for golf. They won't pay for any active amenities. That would be an athletic field, dog park, an ice skating rink, and they won't pay for any golf associated projects at all. So if there is golf of any kind on the project, then the donor's contribution goes away. And this scope is applied to alternatives 4 and 5. We applied it to passive amenities, which are walking trails, bridges, different things like that. Wetland short-term maintenance and wetland long-term maintenance, which is an escrow fund. And we'll talk more about that in a minute.
Mark?
Yes.
V3 has a different annual number for short-term maintenance, so put that down in your list of.
Yep, I
look at that.
already did.
Okay, I think it's 2-something, 202
Yeah.
or something.
Yep, I already noted that as they were going through there. The high-level plan is just we set aside some modest funding to cover high-level planning by the park board. This would be which would help them to address any general goals and design parameters. Working assumption, we put $1,000. We set $1,000 aside for that. It's a task the park board is going to have to go through. Community input, surveys, mailing, that kind of thing. The park board is working on a contract with a firm called Public Communications. That contract is valued at $29,800. Legal
Hey,
fees,
Mark,
yes.
I'm sorry, and I'm not sure where we should interject comment, or if you're going to go down the
I've
whole
got,
list, but
I have a legal pad with way too many pages on it, George.
but I'm thinking that there's actually two levels of community input. There's going to be this initial community input level to decide which of the 8 alternatives that are going to be pursued. But then once an alternative is selected, if it's out there to the right or in the middle of the chart, there's actually going to be most likely a second round of community input to develop a particular plan. I mean, the park district, even when we do playgrounds, we go through this. We have an architect come in, we pay them to hold a series of public hearings. So I think we've got another, we have to insert another line in there for some of these alternatives. You know, obviously not the one where we do nothing because we stop. But that's just my thought.
Yeah, we can do that. I think some of that was probably included in the conceptual design. But I appreciate where you're coming from, and we can tease that out, George. Legal fees, this would be the park district's legal fees, and this would be applied to preparation and execution of the intergovernmental agreement, a contract for the owner's rep, banking, other contractual documents, any review of the Army Corps of Engineers permitting and things like that. This is a working assumption. We laid out different levels of complexity for each of the different alternatives. We assume that alternatives 1 to 3, even though they might be for do nothing, are still likely to have some amount of legal input and review. And we assumed $500 per hour. And when we get to the other page, then Julie can tell us whether we're even in the ballpark for that. Project oversight, project management by an engineering firm as an owner's representative. This would be a firm who would delegate an individual or individuals to depending on the element here, would be less intensive and more intensive review of the project. So for alternative 3, you'll recall that alternative 3 is intentional storage on the golf course. I put $250,000 in here, and here's where it came from. The typical routine oversight is about 5% of the cost of construction, cost of the project construction. That's a figure that was provided by the village. They do this routinely. Alternative 6 as a golf course would be a much more intensive process and would probably be not only an owner's representative, but would also include probably a representative for who was golf course knowledgeable, a subject matter expert. And we set the working project cost at $8.5 million for alternative 4, $9 million for alternative 5. The difference there being additional active recreational activities and the need to have some expertise and spend more time on that. and the golf course at $10 million. Conceptual design for the next,
Mark,
yes, please.
are you mainly focusing on engineering oversight here of physical changes as opposed to someone who's gonna oversee the creation of a wetland bank and
Yeah.
an IGA and
This
things
is,
like
yeah,
that?
yeah, exactly. This is for project oversight. This would be someone who would be the park district's liaison for the most part with SMC.
Is that, I'm sorry, is that for the project site oversight? Is that
Yes.
fine? Because I mean, that number seems really low because we're looking at doing some pool renovations. And just for the pool renovation would be $1 million total, and the construction fee, just to manage, not including the engineers, just the construction fee, watching them, is $380,000 to $433,000.
For an
Just a project renovation. So that number seems really, really low.
Okay, all right.
Because we have some, some bids
Okay,
for the pool
well,
for smaller projects, and the construction fee,
yeah,
the construction oversight person for just that project is the same amount you're putting here.
yeah,
And that's just for $1 million.
okay.
And this is a $9 million project.
Okay, I can.
So I would think it would be a lot more for that.
Well,
project
I can,
manager.
I can, I'll take that that
I
question.
can send you those facts.
Yeah, I can take that question. And in fact, what I would do is probably consult with Mr. Russell, who let those contracts himself. So he would be our subject matter expert, quite frankly. And I will get in touch. George and I will talk about that, and would be pleased to see the input that you have from the pool.
Okay.
Thank you. Conceptual design, formal design costs. These are 100% paid for by SMC for stormwater and wetland. There would be some, in the case of alternative 6, there would be some cost sharing, because some of the work that SMC would do would overlap with the golf course. So that's a bit of we don't know what that is. That's a golf course specific question, and as it points out there are other golf course costs that aren't included, and we'll talk about that in general in a little bit when we flip on the other page. So we can go.
I'm sorry, Mark, since it sounds like you're jumping to the next one.
Yeah.
Alternative 5 would also would not just involve SMC, because they wouldn't be involved in the all these work elements that are listed as SMC for the active recreation projects. I mean, there would have to be a split off of those costs for whatever was selected.
Okay, good point. Survey and engineering. I'm gonna lump some of this together, and George would probably point out too that when we get into survey and engineering, that there would be pieces of that would be separate as well, if those were specific for alternative number 5. So, but on the whole, at least for the case of this analysis, we're assuming that conceptual design, survey and engineering, regulatory and permitting, site prep, and if you want to jump down to site development, are all covered by SMC. Stuck in the middle there is bonding, and that's a surety bond or a letter of credit and whatnot. And the surety bond would be paid by SMC and or whatever contractor was involved. Should not be, that shouldn't be an outlay by the park district.
So Mark, when you're talking bonding here, you're talking bonding related to the work being done.
Correct. Correct. I'm not talking about a bond that would be involved with funding any element of the project. You're correct. And I can let me clarify the word bonding so that there's no misunderstanding for that. Thank you. I broke the amenities in alternative 4 and alternative 5 out so that we could be fairly clear. Alternative 4 includes the passive amenities such as walking paths, benches, bridges, and the like. This would be anticipating walking paths that would be on the upland prairie as well as down in the wetland area. We used a working assumption here of $250,000 for that. The donor contribution would cover 100% of that. We do need to develop the facts for this, and the information here is based on the donor correspondence. The donor will contribute toward passive recreation only. Active recreation amenities are not covered. Alternative number 5 adds active amenities to alternative 4. And this could include, it does mention golf there. We're going to clarify that with the additional alternative we mentioned. But we added an additional $250,000 to that budget. Now, provided we don't include golf in alternative 5 in any way, shape, or form, then the donor will pay the $250 for the passive amenities that are part of alternative 5, but leaves the park district to cover the balance. So if we want if we wanted a soccer field, having spoken with Lake Forest Parks and Rec and Lake Forest High School, a soccer field would start at around $200,000. And that's just for a plain vanilla field, and it would include drainage, but it wouldn't be include all the accoutrements to be used for, let's say, an interscholastic use. It would be for a recreational use. And I'm from what I've been given to understand, there are some differences, and some of those differences can be expensive.
And Mark, quick question, with this line item amenities, is this intended to be a dollar assumption for both design and construction of all the amenities and each of the elements? Is that essentially
that's good. That's a good question, George. Let's talk about that. I would appreciate your counsel on that. Mitigation banking. This is the banking expenses to establish and market wetland credits. This has to comply with Army Corps regulations. We've estimated that at 15% of the total credit cost. And that's a working assumption based on a very general conversation with Mr. Ryan. And he did not provide us with that figure. Specifically, he kind of gave us a very general, what would you call it, Steve?
General guidance.
A general
Remember
guidance.
that It's not credit cost, it's credit sales.
Yeah. Thank you.
This is the hardest number to get to.
And this is a number that is hard to come by. We'll put it that way.
Yeah. This is the hardest number to get to because the people that do this work, the Land and Water Resources, B3, Hay Associates and others, they don't break out this cost. They remember that they bear all the risks and they do all the work on a shared revenue basis with their clients. So they don't break these things out separately. So as we develop relationships with the industry, we're gathering more information about what this part of it costs. But remember, it's a closed private market. So it's much more difficult to get comparables, and we're still working on nailing this down to the best degree that we can. But we put a plug in there.
But conceptually, this would be like hiring a John Ryan to be the mitigation banker?
Conceptually, hiring an individual who is conversant in the marketplace, knows the sellers, knows the buyers.
Okay.
And would create the market in effect. It'd be a market maker and broker.
Okay.
Yeah. Performance maintenance. This is the cost of maintenance through the initial credit release. And so this comes in like year 2 or year 3 of the project. This is maintenance of the wetland from its initial development, basically from dirt to initial growth. And this will be 100% paid for by SMC.
No, they specifically said at the meeting that it would not be through initial credit release. She specifically said that. Sandy Hart said that.
Actually, SMC has said that they would do that, Emily.
Not at the meeting yesterday.
Yes, he did. And let's just hold that because he's going to respond to those questions in writing. So we'll have in writing.
That was the big topic discussion.
Okay, there's two. I think there's a subtle difference here. Okay. So this is the initial. This is like your new car warranty. In other words, they will warrant the initial growth and initial success of their plantings. Long term, beyond the 2-year period of time, SMC does not cover it. That becomes a park district responsibility. That happens to be the next line. So in the event we're looking at something like alternative 6, which includes a combination of wetland and golf course, you would have to split that out. And there would probably be some park district responsibilities there where it is something would be related to a park district or golf visions, where something would be have to be accommodated. The short-term maintenance, wetland short-term maintenance, this is an Army Corps requirement, and the onus here is on the property owner. And the maintenance is reviewed before the Corps before the final release of credits. So there's an inspection process. I think if you note, the inspection process was detailed in the V3 presentation before. So in alternatives 4 or 5, which were are the wetland alternatives that are on the other page, we factored in $37,500 for 5 years. And this was an estimate that was provided to us by SMC. The donor funds would be applied to cover 100% of that. And what is shown on the spreadsheet is a 5-year cost, not a 10-year cost, but the 5-year cost. Alternative 6 is $25,000 for 5 years. That's because in the cooperative use of Gulf and wetland, there's actually about 35% less wetland area that needs to be covered there. The Corps requires that the property owner establish a lifetime escrow account to cover the lifetime maintenance of the wetlands. And in alternatives 4 or 5, we base this on $15,000 in annual cost at a 5% draw would be against a $300,000 escrow. Alternative 6 would be about a $200,000 escrow. This is probably, if we take a look at V3's estimate for short term, we probably should take a look at the figures for maybe a different set of figures, or triangulate the cost for long-term maintenance as well. But that's based on what we got from SMC. We were originally talking about $500 per acre for short-term and $200 per acre per year for long-term.
Is that including personnel?
That is a, generally speaking, Mr. Ryan had told us initially, and I think Mr. Slowinski had also told us that the best practice is that these maintenance, wetland maintenance would be performed by an outside firm, and that those costs were sufficient to bring an outside firm in to do it, rather than doing it, let's say, by the park district, because there are some particular skills and permits, and whether, you know, in terms of how to deal with the particular plant products, as well as weed control and pesticides, herbicides, and those kinds.
That's correct. That's correct. But I know when we had Libertyville, they did their presentation. They mentioned that their land is about 80 acres, and they have 3 outsourced individuals. And so I'm just kind of confused with that 75,000 for 3 individuals. Seems kind of low.
Well, I'm telling, again, we actually have been given a figure by SMC, and we can certainly triangulate that figure. Okay. But that's actually a situation where somebody's given us a figure. And so we use that. Other maintenance, this would be maintenance that's not covered by wetland or golf course. This would be the cost to maintain stormwater features. So if in the case of alternative 3, if we had a bunch of swales, then we're going to have to mow those. We may have to do some maintenance to those. In the case of walking trails, they might have to be maintained. Replace a bench, mowing and striping of a soccer field, something like that, mow the dog park. These are working assumptions. Hang on. I would submit that we should work with the park district to do that. Having said that, a lot of this is, some of this will have better precision when we figure out, for example, we make some assumptions on the actual length of the walking trails, and then we can talk to like Lake Forest Open Lands or somebody like that, because they probably have a pretty good figure. George may have some other information as well. This is another work in progress. Golf specifics, there are a host of golf costs that we can't begin to articulate. Without specific expertise, I'm reading here, it's difficult to estimate certain golf costs. Without a design or conceptual design, it's not possible to estimate the percentage of cost to which SMC would contribute. SMC will pay to restore disturbed course areas which are returned to golf use. We do have a quote from a subject matter expert, a golf architect with significant experience in developing golf courses and wetlands. We talked about him at our last meeting. He lives here in the Chicago area, and he has given us a design concept quote of $13,500 to do that work. Golf short-term and long-term maintenance. We're assuming that this is a placeholder just to make sure that if somebody reads this, they say, well, who's going to maintain and take care of golf course maintenance? And that's covered through golf visions. So Steve mentioned, kind of scrolling down here a little more, these are some FYIs, credits available for sale. Steve mentioned that the V3 analysis shows that there could be 77 credits. We reduced that by 2 to cover walking paths and things like that. We are assuming 50 credits available based on Greg Martin's conceptual design and losing about 35% of the, or 25 credits of the wetland to do that. Deb Fisher had asked about a release schedule. This is a very top level based on information that Mr. Ryan and Mr. Slowinski have given us. If we move forward on this project to do, now this is specific to wetlands, which is a little more complicated perhaps than like alternative 3, but this one would require, we would have 20% of the credits released in 2023, another 25% when we've met hydrology standards. These are all Army Corps stage releases. In 2027, when we reach what they call interim vegetative standards, there's a second 25% release. And then at final credit release, which would be in year 7, would be a 30% release. Along the way, someone asked the question about what to do about the clubhouse, particularly if there was no longer a golf course. And we offer up the fact that it's possible to reuse the clubhouse, perhaps as a restaurant. We didn't assume any outlay of funds by the park district. The assumption made is that this would be self-sustaining business that would be expected to generate a positive, nice, well, that's a good typo that we've missed, positive cash flow for the district. We did inquire of the donor, and the donor does not care if the clubhouse is used for this purpose. So the suggestion was that it could be a very interesting view out over a natural area for a restaurant. And then we talked a little bit above this on the donor contribution.
Mark, if right now, just Golf Vision handles the clubhouse, so we would have to hire personnel also for that. Because the clubhouse is completely managed and operated by.
No, I'm talking, yeah, I appreciate that. I'm saying in the event that the golf course is closed.
I know, but then that would be, we would have to add personnel. The park district would have to have personnel to manage that restaurant. Right
Well,
now, Golf Vision handles that.
I think the assumption here and you know what, Emily, this is merely a talking point.
No, but it is a financial cost that,
Okay,
I mean,
Emily,
that was one of the financial impact on the park district, both short and long term was the remit.
okay, I think
There's
the assumption that
It's a break-even assumption. So
the assumption here is that the
revenue generated by the restaurant would be offset by expenses.
yeah. And I think the other piece of this is that I think the assumption is that the building would be leased out to a restaurant operator. And in which case it would entirely be up to the operator, and whatever lease income might come the park district's way would be positive cash flow for that building. So the assumption here was, and it's not stated, and it should have been, is that it would be a self-sustaining business. The building would be leased by a third party and operated, and the park district would not have any day-to-day expenses associated with that.
All right,
So,
and another assumption that you've made also is that the long-term maintenance for the golf, replacing with the 9-hole, would be with Golf Vision. They have a lot more people coming through with an 18-hole golf course. If you have a 9-hole golf course, it's less people, which means less revenue, which means they will not be making as much revenue. So then that's not going to offset the maintenance and the capital expenses.
you know what, Emily, you're 100% right. And what I have not attempted here to do, there's some things that we have not included in this, and a lot of it, quite frankly, is related to golf. And Steve talked about it a little earlier.
I know, it would just be nice if you added some footnotes.
In the case where we might be an alternative to, where we're just allowing the water to flow, we have not tried to estimate the loss in income for golf rounds for that, okay? Likewise, when we flip the page here and look at the actual costs, there's a ton of golf-related expenses that we just don't have the time right now, at this point anyway, to make an estimate on. We aren't even in a position to pay Mr. Martin the $14,000 for design, for a concept at this point, okay? Much less in order to even get us close to a figure for what construction costs might be. So we've got a big hole there. And your last point is spot on. 9 holes, there's going to be less income on the golf course. Is Golf Visions going to do that? I don't know. But these are the kinds of things that I would expect that the park board would deliberate as they looked and considered the different alternatives.
Yeah, I was just wondering if maybe then adding footnotes would be beneficial of like.
I can do that. I'd be happy to add a footnote.
All right, Mark, let's pause for a minute and let you catch your breath. And questions for Mark from any of the task force members on the alternative, on the assumption?
Yeah, just a couple quick thoughts up there on the income side. It looks like a number 80 credits was used for 4 and 5 when you do the math. 80 times 120,000 under 4 is 9.
Okay, hang on just a second.
There's a 5, you've thrown in 5 extra credits.
Bear with me here. Let me open up. You know, you're right, George. That's
like
that's
4 and
over.
5
that's-
as that,
So
as
that's
an
over. That's overstated.
yeah.
Yeah.
And what is where are you showing the rest of the donor contribution? You've got this 737 figure.
Well, right now, we don't, according to this model, we don't max out the donor's contribution.
Because there wouldn't be anticipated costs to reach the million?
Well, based on what the donor will pay for, the donor will pay for, going back here, the donor will pay for toward the wetland and prairie. The donor will pay toward passive amenities, maintenance, short-term maintenance, and establishment of the long-term maintenance escrow. And that doesn't go up to $1 million. And the donor said they will, you know, it's not a $1 million donation. It's up to $1 million. It's not like $1 million grant. Now,
I'm not
now
following
if
you.
based on, pardon?
I'm not following that logic. I think the costs are,
Well, I
with
think
everything
that,
they said they might pay for. I'm not sure why we're not showing an income stream there of $1 million, but
well,
that
we're
can
not,
be hashed
yeah,
out
we're
later.
not showing an income stream of $1 million because we have to justify what the costs are that the donor's contribution, to which the donor's contribution would be applied. And it is not a $1 million gift per se. It is up to $1 million and up to as long as 5 years. And so right now, having said that, if I have a feeling, and I didn't crunch the numbers because during the meeting, but I think that the higher if the short-term maintenance costs are more near to what V3 has estimated, it probably will cover and probably a little more for long-term maintenance. I think will probably cover the $1 million. But having said that, it's up to, I mean, it's there. The donor is not writing us a check for $1 million.
I understand. I guess I'm coming from the viewpoint of, I think expenses are going to be higher for a lot of this.
Well,
what's shown
George?
here, and it needs to be worked. So yeah, we can't resolve it tonight. So
No.
And the only other comment I had, because Steve was asking for comments, is I think for, this is if an engineering firm was doing a planning study on a project and they were generating cost estimates, they would probably at the initial get-go, and you're doing this as a volunteer, and Mark, amazing job that you had the guts to put this out in front of the world, in front of the whole village as a first cut. Fantastic job. But be that as it may, I think we should be showing when all is said and done, a plus or minus 30%, not because a plus or minus 10, that sort of says that work, we have that confidence level. And for this type of work with a massive amount of earth to be moved in a very complicated project with so many unknowns, we should be showing plus or minus 30 would be closer to reality.
Yeah. Well, the good news, George, is that the significant portions of the earth moving and the $8 million from SMC is not our burden.
Understood.
And so, yeah, I recognized if we were, I would agree with you 100% if it was, and I'm not qualified to come up with dirt moving and regulatory and permitting by any stretch of the imagination. Had we been, you know, if we'd been out and even talked to some people, that would, in my mind, that would be an engineering cost sensitivity of 20 and perhaps as much as 30%. I would agree with you on that based on my past experiences. But the great, not that we don't have unknowns, but the biggest piece of this, you know, what did Tom say? He was moving how many? 40,000 cubic yards of dirt. Good Lord.
Yeah, I mean, I don't, the
That's a
whole
lot.
concept, the whole concept,
44,000.
Yeah.
He's moving 44,000 cubic yards of dirt. I have no idea what the heck that would cost. And
well,
and weather delays and what you're moving, and if we had to move some hydric soils back in, move the dirt, the other soils out. I mean, it's crazy. It's crazy.
George, when you say plus or minus 30%, you're referring to 30% of the cost of the expense load, right?
yeah, correct.
Okay, so I think with Mark doing plus or minus 10% of the total, I just did some quick math back of the envelope. If you do 30% of the expenses, I think the numbers are really close. But I agree with you, let's use 30%, but let's apply it to the expense factor, not to the total project.
Okay. So in the interest of time, let's flip it over and be real adventurous here. Let's flip it over and go over to the first page.
One more question, Mark, before we do that.
Yeah, please.
What about the cost of the park district hiring someone to oversee the whole permitting and prospectus and that aspect of the project? Yeah, I think in our earlier discussions indicated that there probably wasn't anybody at the park district right now that has any experience in doing that. And they'd either need to bring in someone to do it, or someone like John Ryan or V3 or something would have to be hired to do it, to have the team of experts that would allow us to go through the prospectus development and permitting.
I would say that if we want somebody else, if we want independent oversight of that, then we're probably going to need to add another point or two to our project management costs. Yeah, that at some point in time, and I'm not qualified to do this, to understand that probably is at what point, you know, at what point do we accept the fact that SMC and or their contractor, like a Hay of Associates, are the subject matter experts on that, and to what degree we want to wade into that and have some and have a knowledgeable person say yes, that they've done it correctly, you know.
So Mark, let's defer this, because one of the answers SMC is giving us is SMC going to be using a professional wetland firm to assist them in just these kinds of activities?
Yeah. And
so
then
if the answer is yes, then I think we load this a little less. If the answer is no, we need to add a big load here.
Yeah. Well, and you know, the reality here is I don't know enough about SMC. I've talked at length with the stormwater manager for DuPage County, And they operate with, they have a document called Document 25 with the Corps of Engineers that gives them almost complete autonomy from the Corps. And so they do it all themselves. So I don't know what, at what skill level SMC or operates. So I can't comment on that. So let's go ahead and take a look at the spreadsheet. So we'll start with the proposition that the sale of credits is overstated by about what, 2%? But it's sort of equally unfair all the way across. So we still have a model that we can use. So rather than 75 credits, the sale of credits line is 80. The donor contribution, we talked a little bit about before. And we have a budget of up to $1 million to work with there. We talked about putting together a high-level plan. For the model, we assumed that there was no high-level plan required for alternative number 1, but we did need to do something for the others. We talked about the community input at the with the contract. It was, and I'm looking down at my notes. We also talked about the need to probably add some figures in there for what I guess I would call a master plan. So that's a line that we probably should break out. Legal fees, figuring that there is going to be at least something that if we have to reject the SMC offer, we're probably not going to escape from that. We put a very nominal amount of legal fee in place for alternatives 2 or 3, and a more substantial amount of placeholder there for alternatives 4, 5, and 6. Project oversight, alternative. We assumed that there would be no need to have an owner's representative in the case of alternatives 1 or 2. Put in a fixed amount as a placeholder for alternative 3. That would be where there's design storage on the current course. And then that's primarily because we really don't know what we don't have a figure on which with which to work in terms of what the project cost would be, but figuring it would be a sizable amount less than the process of putting the prairie together. Alternatives 4 and 5 are based on a 5% fee, and then alternative 6 is a 10% fee. Then we get into the conceptual design, survey, and engineering. All of these through here are costs that would, in our situation, would be borne by SMC. So we are assuming that if there was storage on the course without any changes, any kind of surveys, any kind of permitting, anything else like that would be, SMC would step in to cover. And certainly they would cover any intentional storage in alternatives 3, 4, 5, and 6. Moving down to bonding, we talked about the performance bond on the before. Site development, we talked about Amenities. We talked on the assumptions page about setting forth $250,000 for passive amenities, and then 250 plus another $250,000 available for active recreation. That number is probably low, but we don't really know. We don't know at this point in time what the community says that they're valuing, so we really don't know what we're going to be putting in there. Wetland banking is put in at a figure of 15%. That would be overstated a skosh because of the credit figures above. Short-term maintenance, we talked about the assumptions that we made before on the assumptions page. Talked about the long-term maintenance and where we got those figures. The long-term maintenance for other activities. We plugged in a sizable amount more for long-term maintenance where we have active recreation, and that covers the need to take more intensive care of a skating rink or a soccer field in terms of being mowed and striped and all those kinds of things as well. And then the golf short and long-term maintenance, assuming that would be covered by Golf Visions, and in the case of golf, there wouldn't be any change. And accepting the fact that Golf Visions may or may not choose to participate with us in if we went with a 9-hole golf course. So we come up with a net figure, and you know, it almost would prefer to look at these in big round numbers, because it's like, really, $200 difference between one versus another, you know, that's a little bit hard to take. But also recognizing that these figures on the whole, I did a plus or minus 10%. And we can talk about whether it should be 10 or 15, whether we should look at trying to look at expenses up above and determine whether the expenses up above, how variable those might be. I accept George's counsel that there's a lot of variability in the construction costs. The good news is that we aren't paying for the cost, the construction costs. Someone else is. Somebody else is paying for the $8 million, and whether it's 7.5 or whether it's 9 to do the project is at the end of the day is somebody else's burden and not the park district's. And that's it. That's kind of where we're at. I've made a list of changes to make to the model, and over the next day or two, I will, based on what I've heard so far, try to provide to you an updated document that's corrected. But more than anything, trying to come up with a model, trying to come up with something that begins to help us understand the financial impact of the alternatives that we're considering. I don't guarantee that they're 100% correct, because there are a lot of working assumptions here. But if we can endeavor to try to be comprehensive in identifying each of our sources of income and sources of expenses, then I think we can begin to talk more clearly to each other and to the community. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for talking. Thanks for all the work, Mark. I know you spent much of the last week pulling this all together. I have a list of notes too. I suggest if other task force members have specific comments, please get them to Mark, probably through John, so that we can update this and get it back to you so that we can hopefully, finalize this at our next meeting.
Steve, I want to carefully call attention to alternative 6. And I think probably in getting to the bottom line, I was sort of mentally letting out a big, but if you look at alternative 6, it's one big slug of TBDs. And there's just way too much information that we don't understand about building a golf course. And yeah, if you can swing it over there to the right, there's just a tremendous amount of information. As it is, you can begin to see the sensitivity and the difference between looking at the nets, even as it stands. It's in my subjective opinion, it becomes pretty hard to think forward with alternative number 6, just because of the amount of funding that would require. Greg Martin tried to, as I understand it, tried in his concepts as he's thought through this to conserve what he can with tees and greens and fairways and things like that on the prairie in putting together a 9-hole. Having said that, there's a lot of construction involved that I certainly can't begin to comprehend for number 6. And that's why there's a lot of TBD there. And so my only thought there is that if strategically there's an interest in understanding alternative 6 to a greater degree, then it's probably appropriate to take a look at Mr. Martin's his offer, which is a very detailed proposal for a little less than $14,000. So that might help us to get there, or at least come up with greater precision than what we have now.
So Mark, I'd suggest you get with Emily and talk about that, and because we either need to put some numbers here, or we just need to put this alternative over on the side a little bit and say not fully fleshed out theoretical.
Yep.
So maybe you two could talk about that and see what makes the most sense. Other questions from task force members? Any questions from the audience? Everybody's eyes are closed. Can you still see?
John Ryan has his, John Ryan has his
I
hand
was
up.
making things really. So can you get to the mic, or
Sure. I'm just curious, as you're thinking about the costs and the benefits of, you look at it fairly on both sides. So we need to get data. If, for instance, the clubhouse could be used, either way, it's outsourced, right? So it's a fair proposition on either end. It doesn't mean that it couldn't be used for parties. It doesn't mean it couldn't generate lots of other revenue.
You know what? It was mostly when the idea came up, what I wanted to do was to offer it up to the donor and see if the donor would accept the presence of that structure there for another purpose. that was, and that was a concept that had been, that was asked of me. Could we use it? Could somebody come in and lease it from the park district as a restaurant? Hey, that's an interesting idea. I wonder if the donor would even allow that on what's conceivably upland prairie. And the donor said, sure, that'd be fine. And so you're right. I mean, I'm sure that I respect the creativity that I've seen out of the park district staff. And I'm sure that you guys could think up other things that you could use that space for. So
just to let you know, Aaron, you can actually rent it out and to have parties.
Sure.
Through they have catering services that you can use it. It's rentable.
Yeah, my point was simply that we take a database approach, and there are lots of opportunities on either side. We know more clearly the golf course because it exists today. We don't know the other because it doesn't exist here, but it exists in other places. So I guess I just asked, because by the way, you did a phenomenal job, and I can't imagine all the time you put into it. So that was outstanding. I just asked that we look objectively at both sides and the opportunities near and long term for something that we cannot necessarily, we can visualize it because we see others, but we should be pulling data to understand the costs and benefits of other things as well. That's all I'm saying. So that's just an answer.
Yeah.
My name is Skip Martin. I've been a member of the community since 1970. And I really appreciate all the work you guys have done. I was probably one of the first kids that jumped into the pool here when it first opened. And now you're talking about redoing it. So I
Oh, no,
appreciate
not redo.
well, you know,
every 5 years it's got to be redone, right? So
probably something does, right? Something
No.
does. And kind of piggybacking a little bit on Aaron, but probably in a different slate, is that you mentioned earlier about alternative uses and stuff. And I mean, and I've got the impression that it was kind of probably like a spitball into that, right? You were just like, hey, we need this. How about a dog park? How about this? But have you really done anything as far as like on a need basis? And the only reason I tell you how long I've lived in this community is because I've played in all these ball fields. I skated on ice rinks, and I coached baseball and softball here. And I can pretty much tell you that there's been ebbs and flows on use. And the thought process of just putting out a soccer field, or if it's more athletic fields or another ice rink, is there a demand for that? Are we looking at this from a demand perspective, or let's just spitball ideas because this sounds like a great idea? It's open space, or, you know, or whatever. Where today we already know that there's a use. There's already a use for this. And so I think from a comparative analysis standpoint, and I totally respect the way you guys are going about this, but I'm getting the impressions that it's in a vacuum. Because you're not really looking at a cost benefit analysis as it does to a golf vision proposal. I know somewhere down the line that's going to happen, but this is a revenue generating opportunity for the park district as I see it. Once you change that use and you change it to a wetlands, you lose that ability to go back and do anything else to it. You're married to that forever. So I would just kind of caution that based on the fact that, you know, I think it's a great idea to try to help our neighbors to the north with their stormwater problems, but there are other alternatives, and Great Lakes is one of them. So I have a pretty good idea of the wetlands delineation and credits because I've been in commercial real estate and built, you know, shopping centers all throughout the state, or I should say all throughout the 6-county region. And then as far as like this donor, it's interesting, some of the restrictions. Been a part of a church where you get donations that are restricted and then non-restricted. But has there been an appraisal done on this piece of land? $1 million donation sounds great, but if there's a bunch of restrictions to it, I mean, it's not like the person's buying it and then there's zoning restrictions. So I just would kind of caution you as to how, you know, how limited you want to allow somebody who's obviously being very gracious in offering it up, but it's not a grant, and it's, you know, it's a donation subject to. And is that better, is that the best thing for the community as a whole, or is that just pertaining to this person's wishes? Is it the greater good for the community? This land for the pool was donated by a family here, and with matching funds to build a pool. And if you were able to do that, then the land was deeded over. But it wasn't like this huge bunch of restrictions. Hey, I'm going to do this based on all these restrictions. So, and I think also one of the important things is, it sounds like we did go to soccer fields or whatever, but what is currently happening here today is an employment opportunity for young people. You go wetlands, you go whatever, there's really no employment opportunity for the young people in this community. And the fact that I grew up here, used to pump gas at the place today that is a paint store on 176. I can tell you the benefits of having options within this community to go and work at. And I think some of the proposals that I'm hearing right now is that that's not going to happen. It's, you know, not going to happen at all. So I appreciate your time, and I appreciate all the hard work you folks have been putting into this. Thank you.
Thank you, Skip. Any hands raised? Yes.
Comment from John Ryan.
Hello, John.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Sticking with us, John.
Hello, everybody. How are you? I took some notes, and I've got a number of different things I'd like to comment on. First off, in looking at V3's report, where they said the total volume of proposed grading was 44,000 and change cubic yards. I did the math, that's 27.7 acre feet, not 227 acre feet. So just a clerical error. I'm sure they're just.
John, can you repeat that?
Yes. I'm looking at page one. Let me put my glasses on just a minute. I'm looking at page 28 of the V3 report. At the bottom of that report, it says total volume of proposed grading is 44,696 cubic yards, which they translated to 227 acre feet. That mathematically is actually 27.7 acre feet. Just wanted to make that clarification. There was apparently a typo on that exhibit. And the way I came up with that, just so that anybody could check my math, you take the number of cubic yards and you multiply it by 27 to come up with cubic feet. And then you divide that by 43,560, which is a number of square feet in an acre. And that comes out 27.7 acre feet.
Okay, we'll go back and look at that. What else do you got?
Well, the 10-year sale that V3 had proposed, they have two banks in Kane County, both of which compete with me, and I'm a heck of a salesman. I've never used 10 years, but that's been their experience. I think primarily because they're competing with me. Thirdly,
John?
Yeah.
John, what would you suggest that we use?
I would use 7.
7.
Yes.
All right.
thirdly, you were talking about SMC paying for the regulatory permitting and getting you through the Army Corps of Engineers. If I heard you correctly, you are asking them if they are proposing to use an outside source or an inside source. Could you clarify that?
Yes. We're asking them if they will be using a qualified professional.
Okay, because I work with SMC, I at least coordinate with SMC. I don't work for them. I just coordinate with them a lot and talk to the qualified people that they would have that would be doing that work if SMC was going to do it. And they tell me that they don't have that time in their workload. So hopefully SMC is talking about paying for an outside consultant to do that, because
We're on that, John.
good, great. Next point. Bonding, you were saying that it may be assumed by a contractor. I used to be an earth moving contractor. If the contractor is going to assume the bonding for the short-term maintenance, they're going to add that into their bid. So it's going to come out of the revenue stream one way or another.
Well, for sure.
Just so you understand it.
Yep.
The $250,000 for amenities. Amenities haven't been discussed that much, but I know we've talked about some paths, perhaps some signage, that kind of stuff. It just feels a little low to me, just gut feel. You have a 15% of sales on for the mitigation banker. I suggest that you listen to earlier tapes, because that was discussed and that wasn't the number that was discussed. Let's see. The initial maintenance, you talked about 2 or 3 years. Initial maintenance is typically 5 years. And what that initial maintenance is for is to get you to the point where you've met final performance criteria, after which the long-term maintenance kicks in. I just wanted to clarify, just make sure. I wasn't sure from the presentation whether that's whether you understood that, but I just make it a clarification.
John, what we had been given to understand was that SMC would get us to the initial approval. And then there's, from the initial approval to the final is like 5 years, potentially 3 to 5 years. And that would be, SMC would pay for it to get us to the first initial approval. The Park District would have to arrange to pay for the second, that intermediate period. And then the long-term maintenance would be escrow. Is that a good or not a good understanding or assumption for us to be using?
Mark, perhaps it's a difference in terminology between what you're using, what I'm using. I'm trying to understand. I think it would be imperative to find out to what stage, whether it is the initial release, whether it is an interim vegetation release, or it is a final release that SMC would be paying for.
It It would be initial, John.
Okay, then that means that they are not gonna pay for any maintenance because there is no maintenance to get to the initial
Okay.
release.
Well, what would be a better term for that?
Well, that means it would be the park district's, it would come out of sales, or it'd be the park district's expense for all of the maintenance, long-term and short-term. Because if SMC is only going to pay to get you to the initial release, the initial release happens when you have the project permitted, you place a conservation easement on it, and you put up the financial assurances. At that point, you have expended $0 on maintenance.
Okay. All right. So that's something we should clarify with SMC.
Yes.
Thank you.
No problem. I am trying to read my writing. Oh, you mentioned you had talked to, no, it was I believe it was a member of your audience. Had mentioned that Libertyville Township has 3 individuals and that the it was like a $75,000 cost or something, and that seemed low. I've been working with Libertyville Township for years, so they do have 3 individuals that do the maintenance on their sites. But that includes 2 mitigation banks and about a dozen other sites. And so, so if you were to look at the cost of 3 individuals and just try to look at that as that's all covered by one bank, that's an incorrect assumption. Because they've got a lot of open space, and those 3 individuals are very hard workers, very great guys. I just think it was perhaps a lack of information that that assumption was made.
All right.
All right. Let's see. Boy, as I was getting more tired, my penmanship got worse. Let me see if I could read this. Oh yeah, there was some discussion about the cost of oversight of putting together the prospectus and the banking instrument, which are the 2 documents in the permitting process of the Corps of Engineers. And if you are to hire a consultant, whether it's Hay or V3 or whoever, to do that, they're very qualified to put that together. But having a person with wetland banking experience looking at it, and even if SMC were to put those things together, arguments made within the prospectus and within the banking instrument need to be crafted with the park district's best intent in mind. It's not a tremendously expensive endeavor to have someone qualified to look at that, to make sure that your interests are protected. But it's critical in trying to maximize your credit yield if a mitigation bank is the direction that you're going.
All right.
With that, I thank you for your time.
Well, you know what? Let John, if I might, I have I'd like to pick your brain here just a little bit.
What's left of it tonight?
Sure.
Go ahead, Mark.
Okay, thanks. We've seen a couple of different figures that we should use for dollars per acre per year for short-term and long-term maintenance. Do you have a figure that you would recommend that we use?
They're quite different, the cost in the short-term and the long-term maintenance. Short-term maintenance is quite a bit more expensive.
Right.
than Maintenance.
Right.
I believe that V3 provided you with some numbers on those items. Am I correct?
Yeah, they did. You think those are fair?
Those are plenty safe. I'll put it that way.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
All right. And the last one was you suggested, and I'm trying to remember who on our task force had brought up, maybe it was George, and forgive me if I misspeak, but you were talking about oversight of the permitting and the regulatory process, just to make sure that the district's interests are protected. But you said that wasn't expensive. What does that mean? Can you give me a general kind of figure for that? How many hours or
well,
how
Mark,
much that might cost?
I'll put it this way.
Right.
Again, I'm trying to choose my words collectively since we're recorded. If it were me, and if I were looking at a contract where I was to provide construction supervision and I was to provide the sales of credit for an agreed upon percentage, the additional work required in doing that for making sure that would the consultants are protecting the park district's best interest would be very nominal. I'm not even sure I would charge for it.
Okay.
But on the other hand, if I was just hired to protect the park district's interest on only that one item, I would be looking at it completely different. And now I want to comment on, and actually Tom Slinsky and I are friends, and I listened to his presentation, and everything he said was absolutely true and above the board, because this whole concept of handling credit sales, on a percentage of sales, Tom has not done that before. In fact, I've only done that a couple of times, and it's really kind of a kind of outside the normal realm of what either of us would do. I'm more than happy to do it, and I do have one contract that I continue to sell credits on a percentage of sales deal. But normally a guy like Tom or a guy like I, as Steve alluded to in the presentation, take on a whole lot of risk and therefore look for a whole lot of return at the end. In this circumstance, taking on very little risk, but you're using one's expertise, knowledge of the development community, ability to sell credits, the network you have, and that sort of thing. So it's, all this is a little bit unusual. But it can work. The park district is in a, if they decide to go ahead with the banking program, they are in a completely envious position from every other mitigation banker. You've got a public agency that's gonna pay you to do all your permitting and your construction costs and all that kind of stuff. My God, I mean.
John, we know we're lucky. We know we're lucky. We gotta move on here.
Thank you.
If you think of more stuff, just let us know.
I'm always thinking, Steve, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Anyone else raising their hand?
Yes, last comment is from Deb Fisher.
Hi, I just wanted to clarify, my question earlier actually was related to time to be able to go back to the park. Not so much when the credits would be sold, but when, for each of these iterations that you're doing, how many months, years, whatever would it be before people would be able to be back using the facility? So I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you again.
Okay.
Thanks, Deb.
Okay, let's conclude this part and go to our member reports. Any reports from members?
I do not have a report. I do have a question though.
Yeah.
So listening to John speak, I appreciate that we're asking SMC questions and they're answering them, but I'm wondering if a better approach wouldn't be to have them put forth a proposal. I'm not sure what we might not be asking, what they might be.
Proposal for.
What exactly, let them set forth in writing what exactly they're proposing to pay for, to stick around for, to oversee, to manage.
Yeah. So the problem is that SMC would love to do that, but they would like to know, just to use our vernacular, which of the 6 options should they be proposing? So the park district wants SMC to have a proposal with a complete work plan attached to it. SMC is asking the park district for which of the proposals would you like us to put a proposal together? So that's where we're sitting, and hopefully as part of this dialogue, we can come to an agreement on where that has to happen if there's obviously a contract. But how do we get decisions made so that we can move on to the modeling and to the actual, here's exactly what SMC will do, here's what the park district would like done. So that's kind of the process that we're working through. Emily, you thought about this. You have any comments on that?
No. I mean, why wouldn't it just be to create 70, take the 95 acres and make them wetland? I think that would be what we want to hear exactly. I can't imagine it's going to differ much if we pick a different alternative. It's still going to be, are they covering our expenses through initial release or initial approval? Those kind of basics, which we don't have clearly set forth yet, and maybe in response to the newest questions, we'll get it clearly set forth, but.
Yeah, I mean, SMC, my understanding, SMC has asked the park district, let's go way back to the beginning, 40 acre-feet of stormwater storage, what can we do with it? We'd like to use the golf course. So they have suggested letting it flow. There's been discussion about keeping the golf course and storing it somewhere. There's been this outside discussion about having a wetland. And they would like, I'm not speaking for SMC, but my understanding is they would like direction from the park district as to which of those alternatives they should go through the full pricing model and design model.
I guess I'm not talking about that necessarily. It's just have them set forth, I'm envisioning a 2-page memo of if you were to convert to wetlands, the 95 acres, here's what we would do. If you go to a wetland conversion process, here are the things we would cover.
The matrix memo that was in here, that's what we're trying to get to with the chart on the back that has the tasks and then SMC of the park district. That's what we're trying to do.
I put the onus on them. honestly. Like,
I-
tell us,
I think-
if it's their project, they're asking us for this, tell us what you're gonna do for us.
Well, I think we probably have to ask them for wetlands as well as alternative 2 or an alternative 3. Because they would, particularly for alternative 3, they're going to be going out and grading and moving dirt and a lot of other things. And so at the very least, are we talking about asking them to do all this exercise for keeping the current course, of course, but putting planned storage on it and doing a wetland. I mean, those are, I mean, if you're trying to pare it down to the bare minimum, it's probably 2 and not 1. Right?
Unless I'm being too simplistic here, what SMC wants is 40 acre feet of storage on the golf course property.
Right.
Where it goes and what it looks like, they have said to us that that's the park district's decision. So whatever the park district wants, SMC will work with the park district in order to make it.
Well, I get that, but I think that what what the community wants, what the park district wants is gonna turn in part on what SMC is willing to do. To me, for us to ask them questions for them to answer seems like backwards. It should be them saying.
Okay, so what in the financial model, we've got a whole bunch of rows that are SMC responsible. What more do we need?
Well, I'd like to have them say those things. I know we put it into our little buckets, but let's get them to have a written commitment of exactly what, and is it capped out any place? Is it, I just think that to have them put forward a proposal like that.
So hopefully the answers to those matrix questions will, because it does ask, is there a camp who pays for overage? It asks specifically on all of those areas, who pays for it, who's responsible for it. So hopefully they'll answer that. Yeah. If we could go back to the beginning, we may have done this differently.
Yeah. Okay.
And we should probably talk more, because we may tap into some of your thoughts around how we actually put communication back to the SMC.
Okay.
Other task force members, George, anything?
Yeah, I'll try and make this very brief. The group North Chicago, the Navy, IDOT, and SMC, they have a monthly meeting just to talk about the project from their end. And SMC has awarded the design contract to an engineering firm, Christopher Burke, to move ahead with the design of the pipes up there that would take stormwater from the west side of 41 over to the railroad tracks, with the inclusion of a restrictor, because there have been no decisions about storage, but that is moving ahead. And they're probably right now, if the funding is available to build it, it's probably looking at 2.5 years out. But that pipe would go in with a restrictor. So essentially, no additional stormwater would come downstream. That same contract that was awarded to Christopher Burke Engineering also includes our original request to have them generate a new number in lieu of the 40 acre feet for the newer rainfall data. And also to generate a number to see if the watershed up above Lake Bluff is completely built out, what kind of flow numbers could we see in the future. So that element is moving ahead, and the engineer told me today that he hopes within 4 weeks that that part of the information might be available, but he didn't sound too certain about that. The Navy confirmed, I think I reported this 2 months ago, they will not even start their easement process until the Lake Bluff decision is completely resolved, because they need to know exactly what they're being asked to provide an easement for. So until we have given our answer to SMC, the Navy part of it will not move forward in any way, shape, or form. And that's it.
Thanks for attending those, another Zoom call. Nikki, anything? Yeah. Mark, anything else? You've talked enough.
I've talked enough.
Okay. The only thing I have is the report outline, which I wasn't intending to go over. I just wanted you to see the depth of the discussion. I'll actually just summarize a little bit. So the first couple of sections are really background on the park, on SMC, on the task force, on what the request of SMC is. It's the H&H study, all of the things we looked at in our first couple of meetings. Then moving into what's a wetland and what is wetland banking. So that's not specific to this situation, but just for background as to what a wetland is and what wetland banking is. How you build a wetland, what are the steps that are involved, some of the complexity in the regulatory environment. Then moving in part 8, taking that theoretical foundation and applying it to building a wetland on a golf course. So what does that mean? The V3 study, where would it be? What are the options potentially available? And then the analysis our analysis around what SMC is actually proposing to do. Julie, that's here. What have they said they would do? And who's responsible for what? That's in there. And timelines then. And then finally, beginning in part 9 and 10 is our analysis. So it essentially is what we went over today. It's the building of the financial model and the alternatives that are built into the financial model. And then, which we will need to discuss before I draft part 10, summary and recommendations. And I'm suggesting we talk about success factors, any lessons learned from the research that we've done with other wetland developments. We've always talked about community engagement, and hopefully we have some recommendations. There's probably more that we want to talk about here, but I haven't really thought too much about the structure. And then the massive appendices, everything we've looked at, every slide we've looked at, every report that's been presented to us. So that's the concept. I'll start tomorrow putting it together, and hopefully by the time we meet, I hope to have half of this done by the time we meet the next time. And we'll just go through the process we talked about. Okay. If anybody has comments on that, please let me know. Emily, anything? John? Any other items? Otherwise, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
A motion, Julie, and Al second. Favor signify by saying aye.
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 We're adjourned at 9:32. Only 2 hours today. 3 hours today.